Sua the Alpha King called her a substitute bride. She vanished before dawn with his unborn heir. What could drive a substitute bride to disappear before dawn while carrying the Alpha King's unborn heir? And what happens when the woman he treated as a replacement is suddenly gone? Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into another story of wounded hearts, impossible choices, and a bond tested by pride and fate. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for continuing to support the channel. Your time and support mean more than you know. And tell us in the comments, could you stay with someone who made you feel like you were only another person's replacement? Now, let's return to the night when everything began, and meet the bride who was never meant to stand at the altar. She didn't leave a goodbye. Damien Blackwood's voice was barely more than a breath, yet every servant in the royal chamber seemed to hear it. Dawn had not reached the windows of Blackwood Citadel, and the bedroom still carried the blue-gray hush of night. Damien stood beside the enormous bed, one hand resting against the sheets where Emily should have been sleeping. Cold. Her side was completely cold. For several seconds, he simply stared at the shallow impression her body had left behind, as though refusing to accept what his senses were telling him. Then he noticed the ring. It rested alone on the walnut table beside the bed, catching the weak glow of a dying candle. Emily's wedding ring. Damien picked it up between his fingers. Something tightened behind his ribs. Emily never removed it. Not when the court whispered about her. Not when noblewomen smiled at her with carefully disguised contempt. Not even when he had given her every reason to hate wearing it. His gaze swept across the chamber. Her cloak was gone. Her traveling boots were missing. The small leather bag she kept inside the wardrobe had disappeared. Everything else remained untouched. The dresses. The jewelry. Every expensive gift associated with the Blackwood name. She had taken almost nothing. Emily? He said. Her name toward the empty dressing room, although he already knew there would be no answer. Silence returned. Damien crossed the room quickly and opened the door to the hallway. Your Majesty? A guard straightened immediately. Where is my wife? The man's face changed. Only slightly, but Damien saw it. I thought Lady Emily was inside, sir. Damien's jaw tightened. Find out who was stationed at the east gate. Now. The guard hurried away. Damien turned back toward the room, and that was when he saw the faint reddish stain near the edge of the white sheet. His breath stopped. It was small, no larger than a quarter, but every cold instinct inside him sharpened at once. He touched the fabric, then pulled his hand back. Had Emily been hurt? Had someone taken her? But the ring argued otherwise. So did the missing cloak. She had planned this. She had chosen to leave him. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, a bell marked the hour before sunrise. Damien closed his fist around her ring until its edges pressed into his palm. 3 months earlier, that same ring had waited on a velvet cushion beneath 1,000 candles, intended for another woman's hand. Emily Carter had stood beneath the wedding veil instead, pale and silent before a court that knew she was not the bride Damien had expected. He remembered lifting the veil. He remembered the shock in the great hall. Most of all, he remembered the words he had spoken while looking directly into Emily's frightened eyes. Don't mistake this for a marriage, he had told her. You're only her substitute. And Emily, with more dignity than anyone in that room had offered her, had simply answered, I understand, Your Majesty. 3 months earlier, Emily Carter had learned that a room could hold 1,000 people and still leave one woman completely alone. She stood behind the closed oak doors of Blackwood Citadel's great hall, listening to the low murmur of nobles gathering on the other side. Candlelight trembled across her white sleeves. The wedding gown fit her poorly at the shoulders because it had never been made for her. It had been measured for Vanessa, chosen for Vanessa, embroidered for Vanessa. Even the tiny silver moons along the veil had been selected to complement her older sister's golden hair. Emily's hair was soft brown, pinned beneath fabric that felt heavier with every breath. "Keep your chin up," her mother whispered beside her. Emily looked at Margaret Carter and searched her face for something warm. An apology. Fear. Anything. She found only urgency. "If King Damien refuses this marriage, our agreement with Blackwood collapses. Do you understand what that means for our family?" Emily understood. She had been understanding things other people refused to say aloud since childhood. Vanessa had disappeared shortly before sunset, leaving behind an empty room, an open window, and enough panic to shake the Carter household to its foundation. The marriage agreement between the Carter pack and the Blackwood kingdom had already been signed. Hundreds of witnesses had traveled for the ceremony. Turning back now would bring humiliation upon both families, and humiliation was something powerful people often feared more than heartbreak. So someone had looked at Emily. The younger daughter. The quiet Omega. The one without Vanessa's status or expectations. The replaceable one. "Open the doors," Margaret said. Emily's fingers tightened around the small bouquet in her hands. "Mother." Margaret paused. Did Vanessa leave because she was afraid of him? For the first time, her mother's expression faltered. "This is not the time." The doors opened before Emily could ask again. Warm light spilled over her. Conversation stopped one by one as faces turned toward the entrance. Emily stepped forward. Her shoes whispered against the dark stone floor. She could feel confusion moving through the hall before anyone spoke. At the far end stood Damien Blackwood. The Alpha King wore a formal black coat with silver embroidery at the collar, his dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved for stillness. He was taller than Emily expected, broad-shouldered and motionless beneath the royal crest. Then his gray eyes settled on her. He knew immediately. Emily saw it in the slight narrowing of his gaze. She walked the final 20 feet alone. When she reached him, Damien did not offer his hand. "Where's Vanessa Carter?" His voice was quiet. Emily swallowed. "She is gone, Your Majesty." A whisper swept through the hall. Damien looked toward the Carter family, then back at Emily. "And you are?" The question should not have hurt. Somehow, it did. Emily lifted her chin. Emily Carter. Her sister. Silence descended again. Damien studied the borrowed gown, the unfamiliar face beneath the veil, and finally the woman standing where his promised bride should have been. Emily forced herself not to look away. She had spent her life standing behind Vanessa. Tonight, for the first time, everyone was looking at her. And not one of them seemed pleased to find her there. Damien let the silence stretch until Emily could hear the faint crackle of candles along the walls. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered Vanessa's name. Another voice answered with a quiet laugh. Heat climbed Emily's neck, but she kept her eyes on the king. Damien turned toward Margaret Carter. "You brought me another daughter without warning." Margaret stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, Vanessa's disappearance was discovered only hours ago. The alliance can still be honored. Emily is unmarried, of the same bloodline, and eligible under the agreement." Eligible. Emily almost smiled at the ugliness of the word. It made her sound like a clause hidden inside a contract. Damien's gaze returned to her. "Did you agree to this?" The question startled her. No one else had bothered to ask. Emily glanced toward her mother. Margaret's face remained composed, but the warning in her eyes was unmistakable. Emily thought of the Carter lands, the families depending on the alliance, and the consequences that would follow if she humiliated the Alpha King before his entire court. "I came willingly," she said. It was not exactly the truth, but it was the kindest version of it. Damien seemed to recognize that. His jaw tightened. The royal officiant shifted beside the altar. "Your Majesty, shall we postpone the ceremony?" A dozen breaths seemed to stop at once. Damien looked across the assembled nobles. Emily understood what he saw. Curiosity. Judgment. people waiting to discover whether the feared Alpha King would allow himself to be publicly embarrassed. At last, Damien faced her again. No. The single word settled over the hall. The agreement will be honored. Relief moved through the Carter delegation. Emily felt none. The officiant began the vows. Damien spoke his promises in an even voice. Emily repeated hers carefully, although her mouth had gone dry. When the ring was placed in Damien's hand, he hesitated before sliding it onto her finger. The silver band was cool against her skin. It fit perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. After the final blessing, the hall waited for the king to formally acknowledge his bride. Damien leaned closer, keeping his voice low enough that Emily knew the words were meant for her alone. Do not mistake my decision for acceptance. Emily's heartbeat stumbled. I understand. His gray eyes remained fixed on hers. This marriage exists because your sister abandoned her obligation. You are here to preserve an alliance. Nothing more. Each word landed quietly, leaving no visible wound for anyone else to notice. Emily tightened her fingers around the bouquet. Then I will fulfill the duty you married me to fulfill. Something flickered across Damien's face, perhaps surprised that she had not begged for kindness. But he was not finished. You are her substitute, Lady Emily. Remember that, and neither of us will have reason for disappointment. For one dangerous second, Emily wanted to tell him she had spent her entire life remembering exactly that. Instead, she lifted her chin. You will never have to remind me again, Your Majesty. Then she turned toward the watching court with her back straight and her expression calm, while beneath the borrowed veil, the woman no one had chosen made herself a silent promise. She might have entered Blackwood Citadel in another woman's place, but she would not spend the rest of her life begging anyone to believe she deserved one of her own. By the end of Emily's first week at Blackwood Citadel, she understood that a title could sound like an honor and still feel like an empty room. Servants called her Lady Emily and bowed when she passed, but the traditional silver crown of the Luna remained locked inside the royal treasury. Damien had not ordered it brought out. He had not presented her to the council as his Luna, either. Officially, she was his wife. In every way that mattered to the court, she was still waiting to become something more. Emily refused to ask. Each morning she dressed simply, pinned her brown hair herself, and walked through corridors lined with portraits of powerful Blackwood rulers who seemed to watch her as if measuring how long she would last. The whispers followed everywhere. Some stopped when she entered a room. Others did not bother. At a formal dinner that Friday evening, Emily sat beside Damien beneath a chandelier glowing with hundreds of candles. Nearly 40 nobles filled the long table. She had barely touched her meal when Lady Caroline Westbrook, a graceful blonde seated across from her, lifted her wineglass and smiled. Forgive my curiosity, Lady Emily, but I heard the wedding gown was originally fitted for Vanessa. Is that true? The table quieted. Emily placed her fork down carefully. It was. Caroline tilted her head. How fortunate that alterations could be made so quickly. A few guests smiled into their glasses. Emily felt the familiar sting but kept her expression calm. The seamstresses worked very hard. Caroline opened her mouth again, but a young server approaching from behind caught the edge of a chair. The tray in her hands tipped. Red wine spilled across Emily's pale blue dress. The girl froze. I am so sorry, my lady. Her face went white. The room filled with uncomfortable silence. Emily could feel every eye turned toward her, waiting to see whether the new royal bride would punish a servant to prove she belonged among them. The girl's hands trembled as she reached for a cloth. Please, I did not mean to. Emily looked at the stain spreading across her skirt, then at the terrified young woman. What is your name? Grace, my lady. Grace, breathe. Emily took the cloth from her shaking hand. It is only a dress. Caroline gave a soft laugh. A rather expensive dress. Emily looked across the table. Then it is fortunate the dress has no feelings. The laughter stopped. Emily stood and noticed another servant approaching with panic written across his face, clearly expecting Grace to be removed. Instead, Emily gently placed the cloth back on the tray. "Please bring me some water when you have a moment." "Nothing more." Grace stared at her. "Yes, my lady." Emily turned to leave and found Damien watching her. He had said nothing during Caroline's questions. He had made no move when the wine spilled. Yet something in his expression had changed. His gray eyes followed Emily with an intensity she could not understand. "Emily." She stopped. It was the first time he had used her name since the wedding. Damien rose from his chair, removed his dark formal coat, and held it toward her. Emily hesitated before accepting it. The fabric was warm from his shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. Damien looked past her toward Grace, then toward the nobles who had found the moment amusing. "Dinner is over." Chairs shifted immediately. No one argued with the Alpha King. Emily walked from the hall wearing his coat over her stained dress, unaware that Damien remained beside the table, staring after her. He had expected resentment from the woman forced into another bride's place. He had expected ambition, bitterness, perhaps even anger. Kindness had never entered his calculations. Damien told himself he noticed Emily because a king was supposed to notice everything inside his own walls. That explanation lasted exactly 4 days. On Monday morning, he saw her crossing the lower courtyard without an escort, carrying a basket covered with a plain linen cloth. On Tuesday, he found 3 requests on his desk concerning additional winter supplies for Omega households near the eastern boundary, all written in Emily's neat handwriting. By Wednesday, the kitchen steward reported that Lady Emily had quietly asked for leftover bread to be delivered to families outside the citadel instead of being discarded. Damien read the report twice. "She asked permission," he said. His advisor, Nathan Cole, looked mildly amused. Apparently she did not realize she could simply give the order. Damien leaned back in his chair. "And what did the steward tell her?" "That she is the king's wife." Nathan paused. She replied that being the king's wife did not make wasting food sensible. Damien almost smiled. Almost. That afternoon, snow began falling over Blackwood territory, soft flakes turning the stone courtyards white. Damien was returning from council when he spotted Emily beyond the eastern gate. She was kneeling beside an elderly Omega woman near a row of modest cottages, wrapping a wool scarf around the woman's shoulders. Emily wore no jewels. Her brown hair had escaped its pins, and snow rested against it like tiny stars. A little boy stood nearby holding half a loaf of bread against his chest. "You should be inside," Emily told him. "It is freezing." "My mother needs medicine," the boy said. Emily looked toward the cottage. "Then show me where she is." Damien stopped beneath the stone archway. He could have called her back. Instead, he followed at a distance. Inside the small home, Emily spoke quietly with the sick woman's daughter, arranged for a healer, and left enough food for several days. She never mentioned that she lived in the citadel. She never reminded anyone that she had married a king. When the boy thanked her, Emily crouched until they were eye level. "When you are older and someone needs help, you help them. That is how you repay me." Damien felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He remembered the wedding altar and the cold words he had deliberately chosen. Substitute. He had expected Emily to spend her days trying to prove she deserved Vanessa's place. Instead, Emily seemed entirely uninterested in becoming Vanessa. On their way back toward the citadel, a commotion rose near the bakery. A guard had stopped a thin teenage boy carrying 2 rolls beneath his coat. "I was hungry," the boy whispered. The baker demanded punishment. Emily stepped between them before Damien could announce his presence. "How much?" she asked. The baker blinked. "My lady?" "For the bread." She opened her small purse. "How much?" After paying, Emily handed the rolls back to the boy. "Stealing is wrong," she said gently. But hunger should not become a crime when there is food nearby. Only then did she notice Damien standing several feet away. Her shoulders stiffened. "Your Majesty." Damien looked at the boy, then at the basket in Emily's hands. "You have been busy." Emily lowered her eyes. "I can return to the citadel if I have overstepped." He should have said yes. Instead, Damien heard himself ask, "How many families still need food?" Emily looked up, surprised. "At least 12. Damien turned toward the guard. "Open the eastern storehouse." Then he met Emily's eyes again. For the first time since their wedding, there was no missing bride standing between them. There was only Emily. And Damien was beginning to see her. The first warning came as silence. One moment, the winter courtyard was filled with conversation, carriage wheels, and the soft crunch of boots over fresh snow. The next, every wolf near Damien seemed to sense something Emily could not, and the air went strangely still. Damien stopped beside her. His gray eyes moved toward the western wall. "Inside," he said. Emily tightened her hands around the empty basket she had carried back from the cottages. "What is it?" "Emily. Go inside." His voice was different now, quiet but absolute. Nathan Cole appeared from beneath the archway, speaking urgently to 2 royal guards. Emily caught only fragments. Unknown visitor. False credentials. Western gate. Then movement flashed from the upper walkway. Someone shouted a warning. Emily looked up and saw a dark object cutting through the pale afternoon sky. She did not understand what it was until Damien turned toward the sound. There was no time to think. Emily dropped the basket and pushed him aside. The world became snow, startled voices, and a sharp impact against her shoulder that knocked her off balance. She landed on her knees. For several seconds, she felt almost nothing. Then a hot ache spread beneath her cloak. "Emily." Damien was beside her instantly. She looked down and saw a small tear in the heavy fabric near her shoulder. The projectile had barely caught her before falling harmlessly into the snow, but Damien's expression made the courtyard feel colder than winter. "I am fine," she whispered. He did not seem to hear her. His eyes had changed, silver-gray sharpening with the unmistakable presence of the wolf beneath his human form. Around them, every conversation died. Even Emily could feel the pressure rolling from him, controlled but immense. Damien closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them again, the wildness had retreated. "Secure the gates," he told Nathan. "No panic. No one is to frighten the families outside these walls." Then he turned back to Emily. "Can you stand?" She nodded, but when she tried, dizziness tilted the courtyard. Damien caught her elbow before she fell. His hand was warm and unexpectedly careful. That was not standing. Under different circumstances, Emily might have smiled. "I noticed." He stared at her as if her answer offended him personally. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "You knew something was coming toward me." "Yes." "And you stepped in front of it." Emily searched his face. Beneath the authority, beneath the controlled anger, she saw something she had never expected from Damien Blackwood. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "There was no time," she said. "That is not an answer." Emily's voice softened. "You are responsible for thousands of people. I was standing beside you." I reacted. Damien went completely still. Emily realized too late how her words might sound. She had not meant them as sacrifice or devotion. They were simply true. Someone had been in danger, and she had moved. That was all. Yet Damien looked at her as though she had overturned something fundamental inside him. The royal healer hurried across the courtyard and examined Emily's shoulder, announcing that the injury was minor but insisting she rest. Damien accompanied them all the way to her chamber. At the doorway, Emily turned. "You do not have to stay." His gaze settled on the small tear in her cloak. "I know." She waited. He did not leave. Hours later, after the citadel had quieted and the healer had gone, Emily woke beneath warm blankets to find Damien sitting in a chair near the window. His crown was gone. His formal coat was folded beside him. In the dim firelight, he looked less like the Alpha King and more like a tired man who had nearly discovered the cost of words spoken too carelessly. Emily shifted, and his eyes opened immediately. "You stayed," she murmured. Damien looked at her for a long moment. "You did first. You should be angry with me." Damien's voice came from the chair beside the window, low enough that Emily almost wondered whether she had imagined it. Outside, snow brushed softly against the glass, and the fire had burned down to a bed of orange embers. Emily shifted beneath the blankets, careful with her sore shoulder. "For staying?" she asked. "For everything before tonight." Damien looked toward the dying fire instead of at her. Without his crown and formal coat, he seemed strangely different. Less distant. Less protected. Emily studied the hard line of his profile. Would anger change anything? No. Then I would rather spend my strength elsewhere. A humorless breath escaped him. "You make everything sound simple." "Most things are simple. People make them complicated because the simple answer is uncomfortable." That brought his eyes back to hers. "And what is the simple answer about us?" Emily hesitated. The question felt more dangerous than anything that had happened in the courtyard. "You married me because you needed an alliance. I married you because my family needed one. You wanted Vanessa. You received me." Damien's expression tightened at his sister-in-law's name. "I did not want Vanessa." Emily blinked. "She was your intended bride. There is a difference." He rose and walked toward the fireplace, stopping several feet from the bed. "My father spent most of his reign treating marriage like another border treaty. He taught me that affection creates weakness, and that promises between powerful families last only as long as they remain useful." His mouth curved without warmth. "I believed him longer than I should have." Emily listened without interrupting. Damien had never offered her anything personal before. "When Vanessa disappeared," he continued, "I assumed the Carters had deceived me. Then you walked through those doors wearing her dress. And you decided I was part of it." "Yes." The honesty hurt, but less than a lie would have. Damien looked down at his hands. "I punished you for an insult you did not commit." Emily swallowed. "You called me a substitute." "I know. In front of everyone." "I know that too." Silence settled between them. Emily could hear the clock on the mantel counting seconds. Damien finally crossed the remaining distance and stopped beside the bed. "I cannot take those words back." Emily met his eyes. "No. But I can stop pretending they are still true." Her breath caught. He did not reach for her. He simply stood there, leaving the space between them untouched. For a man accustomed to commanding rooms with a glance, the restraint felt almost like an apology of its own. Emily looked toward the window. "I do not know what you want me to say." "Nothing tonight." Damien moved back, but Emily's hand slipped from beneath the blanket before she could reconsider. Her fingers caught his sleeve. He stopped. She expected him to pull away. Instead, he looked down at her hand as though the smallest touch carried more weight than a royal oath. "Stay until I fall asleep," she whispered. Damien sat beside her. No promises followed. No declarations. He simply remained there while the wind moved around the citadel and the fire faded lower. Emily's eyes eventually closed. When she woke sometime later, her hand was still resting inside his, warm and carefully held. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Citadel, she did not feel like another woman's replacement. And for the first time in years, Damien allowed himself to want something that had never been written into an agreement. Emily knew something had changed when Damien began knocking before entering rooms that technically belonged to both of them. It was such a small courtesy that she almost missed what it meant. Over the next several weeks, their marriage settled into something neither had planned. They shared breakfast when his council meetings allowed it. He asked about the Eastern families and actually listened to her answers. She discovered that he preferred coffee without sugar, disliked crowded celebrations, and read correspondence beside the fireplace long after everyone else had gone to sleep. He learned that Emily hummed when she was nervous and always saved the last piece of bread for someone else. The distance between them did not disappear all at once. It softened. One evening, after a long dinner, Damien walked her back to her chamber and stopped outside the door. "Emily." She turned. He seemed uncertain, an expression she had never imagined seeing on the Alpha King. "May I stay?" The choice was hers. That mattered more than he could have known. Emily held his gaze, then quietly opened the door wider. What passed between them that night belonged only to them, gentle and private, built not from obligation but from the fragile trust they had finally begun to choose. Weeks later, Emily woke before sunrise with a strange heaviness in her stomach. At breakfast, the smell of coffee made her turn away. By noon, the royal healer was sitting across from her with a smile that transformed the older woman's usually serious face. "Lady Emily," Dr. Helen Moore said softly, "you are expecting a child." Emily stared at her. The room seemed to become impossibly quiet. "Are you certain?" "Completely." Emily's hand moved instinctively toward her abdomen. There was no visible change yet, nothing the world could see, but suddenly she felt as though her entire future had shifted beneath her feet. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, followed by tears she quickly wiped away. "Damien does not know." "Then I imagine you have wonderful news to give him." For the rest of the afternoon, Emily carried the secret like a small light inside her. She rehearsed a dozen ways to tell him and rejected every one. She finally decided simplicity was best. Tonight, after dinner, she would take his hand and tell him he was going to be a father. She was crossing the upper gallery toward his study when bells sounded from the front courtyard. Not ceremonial bells. Arrival bells. Emily paused beside the window. Below, a black carriage rolled through the gates, surrounded by unfamiliar riders. Servants hurried down the steps. Nathan Cole emerged from the main entrance, his expression suddenly grave. The carriage door opened. A woman stepped down wearing a dark green traveling cloak. Golden hair spilled over her shoulders. Emily forgot how to breathe. Even from 3 stories above, she recognized her. Vanessa. Her sister looked thinner than she had 3 months earlier, exhausted and pale, but unmistakably alive. Damien appeared at the top of the courtyard steps. Vanessa lifted her face toward him. Emily could not hear what she said through the glass, but she saw Damien go completely still. Then Vanessa reached into her cloak and produced a sealed document bearing a crest Emily did not recognize. The happiness inside Emily turned suddenly fragile. Her hand settled protectively over the secret she had been preparing to share. Below, Damien ordered the gates closed. And for the first time since their wedding night, Emily felt the shadow of another bride enter Blackwood Citadel again. Vanessa's first words to Emily were not an apology. "I did not run away." They stood in a small receiving room less than an hour after the carriage arrived, separated by 6 feet of polished floor and 3 months of unanswered questions. Vanessa still wore her traveling cloak. Her golden hair had lost its careful shine, and exhaustion shadowed her blue eyes. Emily remained near the fireplace, one hand resting unconsciously over her abdomen. "Then where were you?" she asked. Vanessa looked toward Damien, Nathan, and the council members gathered around the long table. "I was taken from the road before the ceremony. The people responsible wanted the alliance between our family and Blackwood to collapse." She placed the sealed document on the table. "This proves who arranged it." The room erupted into low voices. Emily barely heard them. 3 months ago, everyone had believed Vanessa had chosen to disappear. Emily had stood at the altar because of that belief. Now the entire foundation beneath her marriage seemed to shift. Damien opened the document and read it in silence. His expression revealed nothing. One councilman cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if Lady Vanessa was prevented from fulfilling the agreement through no choice of her own, then the original marriage contract presents a serious question. Emily's fingers turned cold. Damien looked up. My marriage to Emily is legal. No one disputes that, Your Majesty. But the political terms were negotiated. Specifically around Vanessa Carter. Another councilman leaned forward. Several allied families will argue that the substitution was made under false assumptions. There was that word again. Substitution. Emily stared at the fire. Only hours earlier, she had imagined Damien's face when she told him about their child. Now she wondered whether she had been foolish to believe the past had truly released them. Emily. Damien's voice pulled her back. You should rest. She forced a small smile. I am fine. But the room had become too warm. She stepped into the hallway, intending only to breathe. The heavy door remained slightly open behind her. She had gone perhaps 10 feet when another councilman's voice stopped her. Then we must ask what Lady Emily represents now that the intended bride has returned. Silence followed. Emily should have kept walking. She did not. Damien answered at last. Emily was only ever meant to be her substitute. The words reached her with terrible clarity. Her breath caught. For one moment, the corridor disappeared and she was back beneath the wedding veil, hearing him tell her exactly what she was. Substitute. She had been foolish enough to think the word had lost its power. Inside the room, Damien continued, but Nathan spoke at the same moment, and Emily heard only overlapping voices. She did not hear Damien finish. She did not hear him say, but somewhere along the way, she became my wife, and that is the only fact this council needs to concern itself with. Emily was already walking. She moved quietly through the corridor, one hand pressed over her mouth until she reached her chamber. The door closed behind her. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her eyes fell on the wedding ring around her finger. She remembered Damien holding her hand beside the fire. She remembered his coat around her shoulders, his questions about the Eastern families, the quiet mornings when she had almost believed she belonged here. Then she remembered his voice through the door. Only ever meant to be her substitute. Emily lowered herself onto the edge of the bed and placed both hands over the life no one else knew existed. I am sorry, she whispered. The child could not hear her, but saying the words steadied something inside her. You will never have to wonder whether your mother stayed where she was not wanted. Outside, the last daylight disappeared behind the mountains. Emily looked toward the wardrobe. By midnight, she had made her decision. Emily packed as if she were borrowing space from the night. 1 plain dress. 2 shirts. A wool sweater. Her oldest boots. The small leather bag she had brought from the Carter estate 3 months earlier lay open across the bed, looking almost exactly as it had on the day she arrived. She left the silk gowns hanging in the wardrobe. She left the jewelry untouched inside its velvet cases. None of it had ever truly felt like hers. On the bedside table sat a small glass bottle of vitamins Dr. Helen Moore had given her that afternoon. Emily picked it up, and her composure nearly broke. That morning, she had imagined placing Damien's hand over hers and telling him they were going to have a child. She had imagined surprise in his gray eyes, perhaps even that rare smile he allowed when no one else was watching. Now the memory felt borrowed from another woman's life. Emily slipped the bottle carefully into her bag. A clock chimed 2 in the morning. The citadel had gone quiet. Vanessa had been given rooms in the western wing, while Damien remained with his council. No one had come looking for Emily. She told herself that made leaving easier. Her heart disagreed. At the door, she stopped and looked back. This room had once felt like a beautiful prison. Somewhere along the way, it had become home. There was the chair where Damien had stayed after she was hurt. The window where they had watched the first heavy snowfall together. The fireplace beside which he had admitted that he had judged her unfairly. Those memories were real. That was what made leaving hurt. Emily looked down at her wedding ring. Slowly, she pulled it from her finger. The pale mark beneath it seemed strangely intimate. She placed the ring on the walnut table beside the bed. No letter. No accusation. If Damien truly believed she had only been needed until Vanessa returned, Emily would not force him to explain it twice. She rested one hand against her abdomen. "You will never grow up believing your mother was someone's replacement," she whispered. Then she lifted her bag. Grace, the young servant from the dinner, was waiting near the servants' staircase with a heavy cloak. Emily stopped. "You should not be here." Grace's eyes were wet. "Neither should you, my lady. If anyone asks, you never saw me." Grace swallowed. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere I can think." Emily fastened the cloak beneath her chin. Grace suddenly stepped forward and pressed a small pouch into her hand. "Food. Enough for tomorrow." Emily stared at it. Months earlier, Grace had trembled before her over a spilled glass of wine. Now she was risking Damien's displeasure to help her leave. Emily closed her fingers around the pouch. "Thank you." They moved through the lower corridors without speaking. At the east gate, the night guard recognized Emily immediately. "Lady Emily?" She forced herself to remain calm. "I need the gate opened." He hesitated. "Does His Majesty know?" Emily held his gaze. "I am his wife, not his prisoner." The guard lowered his eyes. After a long moment, the gate began to open. Cold air rushed through the widening space, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Emily stepped beyond the walls. She did not look back until she had walked nearly half a mile down the dark road. Blackwood Citadel rose against the mountains behind her, its windows glowing gold beneath the fading moon. Somewhere inside those walls, Damien was still awake. For one terrible second, Emily wanted him to come after her. She wanted to hear her name behind her and discover she had misunderstood everything. Nothing came. Emily turned toward the road again and kept walking. Above the eastern mountains, the first thin line of dawn had not yet appeared. Damien knew Emily was gone before the guard returned with confirmation. He stood beside the empty bed with her wedding ring trapped inside his closed hand, listening to the citadel wake around him. Doors opened. Footsteps hurried through corridors. Somewhere below, horses were being prepared. Yet the only sound that mattered was the absence of her voice. Nathan entered first. The east gate was opened shortly after 2 this morning. She left alone. Damien turned slowly. Alone? The guard believed she was taking a private walk. By the time he became concerned, she was already beyond the outer road. Damien's expression hardened. "No one follows her without my order. I will not have half the royal guard frightening her across the countryside." Nathan nodded, then glanced toward the bed. Why would she leave? Damien looked at the ring in his palm. He had spent the previous evening defending his marriage before the council. Emily had not hurt him. That realization came with sudden, terrible clarity. He remembered the open council door. His own words. Emily was only ever meant to be her substitute. He had finished the sentence in his mind 100 times since. Somewhere along the way, she became my wife. But what if Emily had heard only the first half? A knock interrupted him. Dr. Helen Moore entered carrying a small medical case. "Your Majesty, I was told Lady Emily is missing." "She left voluntarily." Helen's face changed. Damien noticed. "What is it?" "I cannot discuss a patient's private medical information without good reason." Damien stepped closer, but his voice remained controlled. "Doctor, she is traveling alone in winter. If there is anything affecting her safety, I need to know." Helen hesitated. Her gaze moved toward the bedside table, then the open wardrobe. "Did she take the bottle I gave her?" Damien looked at the empty table. "What bottle?" Helen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, worry had replaced hesitation. Prenatal vitamins. The words did not immediately make sense. Then they did. Damien stopped breathing. Emily is pregnant? Helen nodded. I confirmed it yesterday afternoon. The room seemed to tilt around him. Damien looked toward the empty bed, seeing it differently now. Emily had packed alone. Walked through the east gate alone. Carried his child beyond the walls while believing she was unwanted. Did she tell you whether she intended to tell me? He asked. Helen's expression softened. She was happy, Your Majesty. She spent several minutes trying to decide how she would tell you. That hurt more than anger could have. Damien opened his hand and stared at the silver ring. Was she afraid of me? Helen was silent for too long. I think she was afraid of discovering that happiness had been temporary. Damien lowered his head. For years, people had feared disappointing him. Now he understood the opposite feeling. He was terrified that he had disappointed the one person whose opinion had come to matter. Nathan stepped forward. We can close every road within 50 miles. No. Damien slipped Emily's ring carefully into his coat pocket. She left because she believed she had no choice. I will not prove her right by taking another choice away. Then what will you do? Damien looked through the window toward the road disappearing beyond the snowy hills. He remembered Emily kneeling beside hungry families, defending a frightened servant, giving kindness without asking who deserved it. Power could command gates to close. It could send riders in every direction. But Emily had never responded to power. Damien finally understood that finding her would require something else. I am going to learn where my wife would go when she believes she has nowhere left to belong. Damien discovered that Emily had left a trail no royal tracker would have thought to follow. It was not made of footprints. It was made of people. At the eastern cottages, the elderly Omega woman remembered Emily asking about quiet towns beyond Blackwood territory. The baker remembered giving her directions to a village near the southern mountains. A farmer whose family Emily had helped during the winter offered another clue. Each person knew only a little, yet together they formed a road built from kindness. Damien traveled it without banners, guards, or royal carriage. Nathan protested until Damien finally said, if she sees an army coming, she will think I came to take her back. And you did not? Nathan asked. Damien looked toward the snowy road. I came to ask. 3 days later, he reached Willow Creek, a small village nearly 200 miles from the citadel. Smoke curled from stone chimneys beneath a pale afternoon sky. Children played beside a frozen pond. No one bowed when Damien rode through the main street because no one recognized the Alpha King beneath his plain winter coat. He preferred it that way. An innkeeper directed him toward a cottage near the edge of town. Damien walked the final quarter-mile alone. His heartbeat grew louder with every step. Then he saw her. Emily stood outside a small white cottage, hanging freshly washed blankets across a line. Her brown hair was loose beneath a knitted hat, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. She looked ordinary. Safe. Free. Damien stopped. Emily turned. The blanket slipped from her hands. For several seconds, neither moved. Her eyes dropped toward his horse, searching for soldiers who were not there. You came alone, she said. Yes. Why? Damien approached slowly, stopping several feet away. Because you left. Emily gave a small, wounded laugh. That was the point. He accepted the words without defending himself. I know what you heard outside the council room. Her face changed. Then there is nothing to explain. There is everything to explain. Emily folded her arms against the cold. Vanessa returned. The original agreement returned with her. You told your council exactly what I had always been. Damien reached into his coat and removed her wedding ring, holding it carefully between his fingers. You heard half of what I said. I heard enough. No. You heard the part that confirmed everything I once made you believe about yourself. Emily looked away. Damien's voice softened. I said you were meant to be her substitute. Then I told them you had become my wife. Her eyes returned to him, but the hurt remained. That does not erase what came before. I know. Damien lowered himself onto one knee in the snow. Emily stared at him. There was no court to witness it. No counsel. No one to impress. What are you doing? She whispered. Something I should have done before asking anything more from you. He placed the ring in his open palm. I am giving you the choice I should have given you from the beginning. Emily's hand moved instinctively toward her abdomen. Damien noticed, and emotion tightened his face, but he did not reach for her. Dr. Moore told you, Emily said. Only after she believed traveling might put you at risk. Emily's eyes filled with guarded disappointment. So that is why you came. Damien went still. You think I crossed 200 miles because you were carrying my heir? Would you be kneeling there if I were not? The question settled between them, quiet and merciless. Damien looked at the woman he had once reduced to another person's replacement, and he understood that no crown, apology, or command could answer for him. Only the truth could. He closed his fingers around the ring and rose slowly. Emily, he said, if there were no child, I would still have followed every road in this kingdom until I found you. Emily searched Damien's face for hesitation and found none. The winter wind moved between them, lifting a strand of brown hair across her cheek, but she barely felt the cold. You say that now, she whispered. Damien did not argue. Yes. Because now I understand what my words cost you. He opened his hand again. Her wedding ring rested against his palm, but he made no attempt to place it on her finger. I cannot ask you to forget the altar. I cannot erase the nights you wondered whether you belonged in my home. And I will not use our child as a reason to demand that you return. Emily's throat tightened. Then what do you want? Damien looked at her with a vulnerability she had never seen inside Blackwood Citadel. You. One word. No royal command. No carefully prepared speech. Emily's eyes burned. Damien continued, I came for the woman who gave away food before she understood she had the authority to order an entire storehouse opened. The woman who protected a frightened servant when everyone expected punishment. The woman who made people trust her without ever demanding their loyalty. His voice softened. I came for my wife. If you decide you are no longer willing to be that, I will respect your decision. I will still protect you and our child, wherever you choose to live. Emily looked down at his open hand. And Vanessa? The council confirmed that her return does not change our marriage. She was wronged, and Blackwood will help her find justice, but she has no claim on the life you and I built. Emily swallowed. You called me her substitute. I did. Damien's answer came without excuse. And I was wrong. He took a slow breath. There was never another Emily Carter waiting behind you. That should have been obvious from the beginning. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She wiped it away, almost annoyed with herself. I cannot simply come home and pretend none of this happened. Then do not. Damien closed his fingers around the ring. Stay here tomorrow. Stay next week. Stay as long as you need. If you ever return, it will be because you chose me, not because a treaty chose for you. Something inside Emily loosened. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of a place where forgiveness could someday live. Then a long howl rolled across the distant forest. Damien's head turned sharply toward the tree line. A second howl answered from farther north. Emily felt the change in him immediately. He stepped in front of her, not touching her, simply placing himself between her and the woods. What is it? She asked. Damien listened. The village had gone quiet. Doors opened along the road as residents looked toward the trees. Between the dark trunks, small points of reflected light appeared one by one. Emily counted 6, then 12, then too many to follow. Damien's voice remained calm. Go inside the cottage. Not until you tell me what is happening. He glanced back at her, and despite everything, Emily recognized the man who had sat beside her bed through the night. Those are not Blackwood wolves. Another howl crossed the valley. Then a rider emerged slowly from the trees carrying a white flag marked with the same unfamiliar crest Vanessa had brought to the citadel. Emily's hand moved protectively over her abdomen. Damien saw the symbol and understood before the rider spoke. Whoever had kept Vanessa away from her wedding had not disappeared when she returned home. They had simply changed their attention. The rider stopped at the edge of the village and called across the snow, "We came for Emily Carter." Damien's expression became perfectly still. He reached into his coat, took out Emily's ring, and placed it carefully in her hand. "Keep this," he said. Emily closed her fingers around it. "Why?" Damien stepped forward as the forest filled with watching eyes. "Because this time, no one decides your place for you."